Okay kids, we're going to do an example of the Countdown app as our demo for today. You can download this example from Teams and play with it. We'll run through it once quickly as a screen share here. So it goes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and at the bottom when it gets to 0 it displays a message that says time's up. And after you click the OK button, it resets back to 5, and I can click the start button again and it runs down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 as well. Notice that the start button turns into a stop button, which allows us to pause the timer, and then we can resume it again later. So it's an alternating start and stop button. So I'm going to make a new project here with new Java project and naming scheme ca.lastname.countdown like before. Make sure you've got your Java set to version 16 right here, and turn off the create module option. And let's click finish. And the first thing that we're going to do is to create a JFrame. So remember that you can search JFR in the pop-up and click next. And now we're going to give it the name of FRM Countdown and click finish. Make sure that you see a JRE system library that shows Java version 16. If yours is showing a different Java version, then right click on it, go to build path and configure. And what you want is a JRE with Java 16 in the module path here. So if you see something else, go ahead and remove it. Select your module path, add a library, the Java library, and you can choose the execution environment of 16 and click finish. After you've done that, now you should be able to swap to your design tab in the editor. And now we can begin designing our interface. So we need a label at the top. Oh, I forgot to choose my layout. So because that one doesn't let us drag and drop where we want things, select your content pane and let's choose the layout. We want it on absolute. And now we'll be able to add labels exactly where we want them. So I'm going to drag a nice box here, and let's set our text as seconds remaining. And make sure that your variable names get set nice as well. So all of the variables that we're going to be using here, make sure you start them out with 3-letter prefixes. We talked about this a little bit the other day when we labeled things with FRM for the JFrames, but labels should start with LBL as well. And I'm going to continue by adding a text field. Same kind of orientation here. Let's put a number of 5 in it to display, and let's call this TXT seconds. So notice how by keeping track of the prefixes here, I'll know which one is which. So this is my text box because it's got TXT, and that one is my label, it's got LBL. That's very helpful in the code view as I'm developing later on. And let's have a button which begins with the word start on it. And because this is going to have the purpose of both start and stop, we're going to label this BTN for button, start, stop. And we're going to make changes with both the button and the text box as we run through the program. So in order to do that, we need these converted to fields. And I'll show you what that looks like in the code in just a minute here. But the key thing is, for your button here, let's convert this to a field. And let's do the same for the text box. Now, mine is already showing as a field here because it's showing convert field to local. So that one's okay. What field is going to mean is if I click in my source view here, I'm going to see up at the very top here, I'm going to see a couple of variables, and these are going to be listed as starting with private. and any of these are available as long as the program is running. So I've got a text box here to work with, and I've got a start-stop button to work with. And I can adjust those and make changes to them throughout the program. And that's going to be important here. In the demo, you saw that I had my number in the text box aligned in the center, and that's the horizontal alignment option here. So let's change that to centered, and that's just purely aesthetic. We can do the same with the seconds remaining, and if we change that to either right or trailing, it'll make it aligned on the right side. We also need to add some code that I gave you. So I gave you some code on Teams that will help us do a timer. So let's go look at that file on Teams. You see timer.java, and we're going to copy and paste in this code just the same way as we did when we did the picture box file. So we need a file called timer, and then we're going to copy and paste everything starting from line 3. We're going to leave the package 1 alone. So let's go back to Eclipse here. Let's make a new class. Notice I'm clicking on the package here, and I'm going to call it timer. Click finish. And now, because we're doing everything from line 3 down, we're going to leave the package alone on both sides, and we're going to replace all of the rest of it. So I'm going to select from line 3 all the way to the very bottom on Teams and copy that. And I'm going to erase everything in this file after the package declaration and paste in the code from Teams. And let's save that. Now in our countdown frame here, we're going to need a place to represent the number of seconds that are remaining. And the way that we're going to do this is with an int variable. So one of the things that's very important in programming is to know the difference between if something is an int, which is a number that we can do math on, and something that's a string. And this one that you see in the seconds text box here, that's a string. And the way that we know that, if we look in our source code here, the text box is getting set with text, and notice how the 5 here is in quotes. That's a string. We can't add 1 or subtract 1 from that number 5 because it's not a 5. That's actually text, okay? So what we need is we need an int that we can do math on. And so let's scroll up to the top here, and let's add another private variable here that we can do math on. So the type for this is called int, int, and we need to give it a name, which is going to be seconds. And we can specify what number it's going to start with when the program boots up by saying equals 5, and of course we end each line of code with a semicolon. And we're going to create one more thing as we create the frame. So we can add code to it. This is all the code that creates our buttons and text boxes, and we're going to create one more piece here. We're going to create a timer, which I'm going to call main. And when you create a timer with my file, you specify the number of milliseconds in the brackets. So we want this to run once a second, and there are 1,000 milliseconds in a second. And then a opening curly bracket. And we're going to finish this line of code with a semicolon. Now, two things are going to be errors here. We haven't declared this variable yet, so let's do that. And to declare one of these fields, we give it private to start. We tell it the type of the thing that we want to make, and that's going to be a timer. And now give it the name. I'm using TMR as my prefix for timers, and I've called it main. So that clears out one of our errors here, and notice how it lights up blue. And if I select it, I see that it matches with the yellow highlight here. And if we point at our other error here, the new type of timer must implement the inherited abstract method timer.tick. So what this means is if you want to make a timer, you need to give it some code that's going to happen when the timer ticks. And we're going to have this code run once a second, or every 1,000 milliseconds. And Eclipse knows that we need to create this because it's over in the timer file. And you can see that here on line 16. So in order to create a timer, you need to provide a tick method. So let's use our autocompleter here. So I point at this error and click on the Add Unimplemented Methods button. And what that's going to do is it's going to create this thing called tick, which is going to run once a second, and we're going to add some code to it. So let's start this out really simple here. Let's take this variable of seconds and let's decrease it by 1, and then let's show that on the frame so that we can see it happening. So to decrease a variable by 1, we give it the name, and the operation to decrease by 1 is minus minus, and we end our line of code with a semicolon. After that, let's set the text onto the text box so that we can see it. Now that was called txt seconds, so we can start typing that in. TXT, if you use a capital S, don't forget you've got autocomplete with control space on your keyboard. And we activate the text box with the dot operator. Eclipse comes up with all of the things that you can do with text boxes, and there's a lot. In order to change the text, we're going to use set text. So I'm using little s, capital T, and finding it in the list here. And that's going to set it to whatever we put in the brackets. So let's activate that. And we want to set it to a string, just like it did at the beginning. Notice how it had 5 in a string format here though. So in order to convert this int that we have here, which is seconds, into a string, the easiest way to do this is start with an empty string, which is a double quote, and add to it the seconds. And let's add some code to our button that activates the timer. So if you go back to your designer and then double click on your start button, and what we can do here, this code inside the action performed piece here is going to run when the button gets clicked. So let's turn on the timer as our first option. So I typed in TMR and hit control space. And dot brings up the things that timers can do. And there's one in here that's called on. So let's run on. Make sure you've got a semicolon here. Save your file. You hopefully see no errors, no red box on here. And let's give this a run and see how far we've gotten. I'm going to click the start button. I see 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, -1, and it keeps continuing. This is great progress to start. We've got a timer that is running. We've got numbers that are changing. Oh, we don't have a way of stopping it, but we're getting there. First step is done. Let's have our program detect when we get to 0. So after we have decreased the seconds by 1 and displayed it on the frame, let's introduce you to the if statement. And so we can so this code can run with a conditional. So we're going to check what the seconds is set to, and if it reaches 0, we are going to run some different code. So this is an if statement, and it has brackets to it. And what we're going to do is we're going to check if the seconds is equal to 0. Now, something that's going to feel strange in Java is that there's 2 types of equals that you have seen so far. There's a single equals, which we used before, creating seconds equals 5. A single equals is when you're setting something. A double equals is checking if they're a match. So in order to test something with an if statement, you need a double equals, and then we're going to open a curly bracket, and this code is only going to run when seconds gets to 0. In order to do that pop-up that I showed you in the example, this is called a J option pane. And we can use dot here. And we want to show, there's a whole bunch of show options in here. The one that we're going to use here is the message dialog. The component that's the parent is not really important. We're going to ignore that, and we can ignore that by giving it null. Null is a keyword in Java that just means nothing. And the message we're going to give is time's up. And make sure you end with a semicolon. And if we run this now, we should get 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bang, here's our message that our time is up, but the timer hasn't been turned off and the numbers haven't been reset. So let's add some more code that's also inside of this if statement. We can reset our seconds. We can reset our seconds back to 5, and let's also display that on the text box, which is going to be with a dot set text. And we're going to set it to the string of 5. And now hopefully we get 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here's our time up message. And it repeats from 5. But I think it's great if we turn off the timer so that it waits for the user to click on the button again. So we can add a line of code that the timer main, TMRM, and then hit Control Space. Using the dot operation here, we can turn the timer off at this point. And now when we run this program, we get 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here comes our time's up box, and we click OK. And at this point, it's still waiting, which is intentional. And we can click the start button, which will activate our timer again. And that's the key parts of the demo. So from here on, the rest of this is kind of bonus stuff, and you can decide how much of this you add to your program. We can change the color of our text box. The background color, I started out with green in mine as the background. And you can make a change to that with an if statement in the timer as well. So mine went to yellow once you got below 2. So let's add so we can add an if statement if the seconds is less than or equal to 2. We can change the txt seconds, and we can tell it to set the background. And in the brackets, we're going to give it a color, which is COLOR. Remember, it's American spelling, and we can use yellow. And that'll give us 5, 4, 3, 2. There's yellow. Which is important to set back to green once we finish as well. And in my example, it went to red as soon as it was expiring. Now, really important, if we want to see this before the text box comes, or before the pop-up comes up, we need to set it before. So we're setting it to red, and then this option pane is going to pause the program. So that gives us the effect of 5, 4, 3, 2. Here it goes to yellow, and then red before the pop-up comes up. And then it returns to green after we click OK on it, and it's ready to go for next time. In order to have the button switching text from start and stop, let's look at the code for that. Right now, all it's doing is it's just turning the timer on no matter what the case is. So when we click the button, let's check and see what text is showing on it. And if it's showing start, then let's turn on the timer. If it's showing anything else, we're going to turn it off. So we can make an if statement here. And we want an if statement based on the button. We're going to get the text off of it and check if it equals, ignoring capitals. Now with strings, you have to do this thing with .equals to check if they are the same text. And we're going to check if it equals the string of start. If it starts, let's put our on into that bracket. And let's change the text to stop with using the set text operation. And that will get it to change from showing start to stop. Now the stop part of it doesn't do anything yet, because all it knows is that it didn't match the text of start. What we can do with that is we can add an else here. And so what else means was it wasn't showing start, it's showing something else. And if that's the case, we're going to flip this around. So let's take these two lines of code. We're going to turn the timer off, and we're going to set the text of it back to start so that it's ready to go to turn it on. And at this point now, when we click the start button, it shows stop. And if I click it, it now displays start again. It's waiting, the timer's not ticking. And when I click the start button, I go 2, 1, and 0. The last piece of this that I'm going to add is that once I reach the end of my timer here, it's still showing stop. I want that to be displaying start so that I don't have to click the button twice before it resumes. So let's change the text back to start when the timer reaches 0. So let's copy that line of code and add it to our if statement when the seconds got to 0. And that is a complete countdown application for you. Time's up, the button goes back to a start, and I can immediately resume it and count down from 5 again.